Welcome to this new civil engineer webinar, which is brought to you in partnership with Geobear. My name's Claire Smith and I'm editor of New Civil Engineer and will be your chair for today's event. Over the next hour, we'll be talking about development and use of the new industry specification for designing with expansive geopolymers. Joining me today to explore this topic with a view to improving knowledge about the use of expansive geopolymers, we have an expert panel and I will introduce them in a moment. For the first 40 minutes, it will be me putting questions to our specialists, and then you'll have a chance to pose your questions to them too. Hopefully, you will have all been able to download a copy of the document through the link in your registration email, so you are ready armed with questions. But we're aiming for the conversation to cover the main points the specification provides, so prior knowledge of the document is not essential to get to the most out of today's webinar. However, you don't have to wait until the end to share your questions. Please type them into the Q&A box on screen now, but don't use the chat box as they may get lost there, and other delegates cannot vote on your questions. The voting helps us to understand which questions you really want to hear answered. And now let's name our panel. I'm delighted to welcome lead author of the new specification, Arab Associate Peter Ingram, Geobear Vice President of Engineering, Andy Lee, Anglian Water One Alliance Senior General Manager Teresa Jeffcoat, and David Symonds Associates Consulting Engineer Jonathan Symonds. So welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us today. So let's kick off with exactly what we mean by expansive geopolymers and their main uses. Andy, can you explain that for us, please? And then I'd like to go around the group and each of us share your experience of how you first came across the technique, what your initial views of it were, and how that's perhaps changed over time. Andy, can you kick us off, please?
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. What are expansive geopolymers? For the scope of this specification, these are basically two-component geopolymer. So this is a mixture of two different liquids which are injected into the ground, and through a chemical reaction, that liquid expands into a solid material, and it's that expansive force that can densify the ground and strengthen soils due to the material properties of the geopolymer.
So how long have they been available in the UK for?
Well, geopolymers have been around quite a long time. I mean, their origins go back to Scandinavia in the 1980s, and they have been used in the general construction industry at least since the mid-1980s, moving through the 1990s. So they've been around quite a long time in the general construction industry.
Okay, great. Peter, when did you first come across the technique and what did you think of it when you first saw it?
Hi, Claire and everyone else. I suppose my sort of first time I came across it was when we used it on a project to try and correct settlements of a large floor slab in the Middle East that had been settling more than it was intended to. So this was a setup with a reactive monitoring system to try and identify when the slab movements had been corrected and it put up to the design levels. And I think, you know, this was quite successful. So I'd say my first experience was definitely a good one. We found it a very useful system for that project. I think how my views have changed over time is really to do with consideration of the project of the technique for other projects I've been involved with. And oftentimes we've sort of hit a bit of a wall due to the sort of systems available being proprietary products, and really finding it quite difficult to be able to properly communicate in the design team, if you like, and to the wider project team how we can use the technique and control it in any sort of clear way. So yeah, I guess that's sort of why I'm here. So.
Great. We'll come on to that a bit more later. Teresa, what about you? When was your first experience with it? And perhaps how's your opinion changed? Oh, you're on mute.
It would be me. I'm fairly new to the use of geopolymers. I think we first came across using them about a year ago, although I've used them in numerous sort of situations since then. So we had some emergency work and a 1500 pipe that had leaked over time, and then through some storm surging had created massive voids around it in the grounds, and this was in a sort of a very populous area, a very busy road. And we were looking at how we could stabilise the pipe and how we could fix it, but we couldn't put people in there safely. And so we looked at whether we needed to dig down, whether we needed to use sort of traditional cementatious grout, and then we looked at, and neither of those could work. So then we looked at geopolymers, you know, and realised that they had the flexibility that we needed in order to be able to solve that problem. And then through that, we've done some settlements of tanks that are settling. We've done void filling. We've done all sorts. So initially, my thoughts were it seemed a black art, and everything we were doing is because we were putting trust in the contractor. But now, sort of having done more of it, I can see the level of engineering in there, when the design's done, it's actually really complex, and it does look like a black art from the outside, but I think on the inside, actually, it's just a normal meticulous engineering process. I think that they're going through.
I think that's not always been obvious, which is partly why we're talking about specification today. Jonathan, what about you? When did you first come across it? I know you've used them extensively on your projects, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah. Morning, everyone. I first started using geopolymers in the early 90s. We do an awful lot of work for insurance companies and get floor slabs settling and moving. And traditionally, you would be going into a house, digging out the floor. You're talking a couple of months from start to finish for a project, and then someone suggested geopolymer. Everyone was a bit dubious, I have to say, but it was all set up, laser monitoring. This floor had dropped 2 inches at one corner, and within 2 hours it was perfectly level and the carpet was going back down. No decoration, job done in a day. And I think people suddenly realised that there were real benefits to something like this, which, as everyone has said, people did think of as a bit of a black art then. So then over the years, the uses have just grown exponentially. I think we've used it for all sorts of different scenarios. Void filling, deep fill, which initially people were very dubious about. We've even used it for emergency works to stabilise a collapsing arch because HSE wouldn't let anyone in. So we went in, filled it with expanded polymer, supported it, made it safe, and then the polymer's easy to cut out with a Stanley knife effectively. And we're even involved in a project now to look at remediating a landslip on a heritage railway with geopolymers.
So the kind of situation you described there, you can see why insurers love it, why homeowners love it. And it's clear that there is a growing acceptance in the engineering community of use of expansive geopolymers, particularly for ground stabilisation. Land stabilisation is something new. But there are still many people in the industry who view the design and use of them as a dark art. I think Teresa used that term, and there's an element of mistrust. Peter, is that something you came across quite a bit when you were preparing the document? Can you explain perhaps why that is?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's probably worth saying at this point, whilst I sort of led the team writing this spec, I'm in no means an industry expert on geopolymers. Certainly my knowledge was low coming into the start of writing it. So this has been a very interesting process for me all the way through. Broadly, I'm here because I've got a lot of previous experience of writing specs and also design guidance. Was here to sort of probe people a little bit and try and tease as much out as possible. I think, mistrust is probably a bit too strong, or at least for me anyway. But I think engineers just like to be able to understand what they're specifying, and at the very least be able to sort of understand what the critical parameters are. What goes in, what should come out, what you might want to measure, and what you should expect. And so it's sort of quite hard for people to go to a specialist contractor and just say, please, can you use your special thing to solve my problem. Really, that's the thing we've been trying to address with writing this spec, just to try and bring a little bit more clarity into the questions that both sides should ask.
So overcoming the knowledge gap on expansive geopolymers is the aim of the specification. And while this webinar is sponsored by Geobear, I want to be clear that the specification is not a Geobear document, but it's a pan-industry initiative, isn't it? Peter, again, as lead author, can you explain how you went about gathering the evidence and bringing the whole sector together to create the document?
Yeah, I can. So, I mean, the intention, as you say, is to make this a sort of more of a pan-industry thing anyway. The idea of it is to allow specifiers to be able to tender for works or tender works to several different specialist contractors and sort of allow a fair appraisal and comparison of their offerings, as you know, as we do for many other techniques, rather than necessarily just having sidle up to one specialist contractor. So our intention has been to try and make this as general a document as possible to try and achieve that. We tried to get together a sort of broad group of people covering designers, users, clients, contractors, consultants, and this was just really to try and get a broad view. And very helpfully, actually, Claire, you ran an article for us in your previous magazine asking for interested people to contact us, and we did have some input from that, and that was very helpful. As I think I said before, what we tried to do is sort of set down what the critical inputs are and expected outputs, and really that's something that works both ways. So this is the what you should provide to the specialist contractor as a specifier, and what they should be expected to provide back to you in terms of design or verification or whatever. I think we've also tried to cover a range of possible techniques, and the other speakers here have spoken about the different things that are achievable with these sorts of products, and really that was to make sure we had very clear specification for a range of things that we could think of that you might want to do, but also so we could provide good guidance notes to go with that. In terms of dealing with specialist contractors, we've worked closely with Geobear on this, and this is a Geobear webinar as well, but it's certainly not a Geobear spec. And we have had input from others, and really, the intention is that this should be applicable to a wide range of products. And I think, that will come through as people start to use this. And if there are areas where it is not, we will fix that.
So it's very much a first draft, and there'll be future iterations perhaps. So what was reaction from industry when it came to developing the specification, Peter? Did they welcome it, or were there barriers to its development? How long did it take you to get to this point?
That's a good question. I mean, I think people I've spoken to are broadly supportive, and and that's really just for the reasons I spoke to before. I think anything that makes something a bit clearer and easier for people to use is a good thing. I think my hope is, as we're making this first version available, and thanks to NCE for hosting that for us, and and providing it out to people listening to this webinar and more widely afterwards, I hope. We hope that people will use it and see what works, and tell us when something doesn't, and then we can keep developing in the future. And that's similar to what's happened to other successful industry specs in the past, so the piling spec or the national timber spec and things like that. You've got to have a go at it in anger, and then we'll see where we get to. We think we've done a good job, but I'm sure we'll be put to the test shortly. So and the intention fully is this to be the thing that people use, and broadly, and not just with a very narrow band of contractors. So we want to ensure this works.
I guess we might find out what people think in our Q&A session later. Who knows? We'll come on to that a bit later. So Andy, Peter's already talked about expansive geopolymers being proprietary materials. Can you explain how having a single specification fits within that context?
Okay, so just to add to what Peter has said, is historically it's been very difficult for from my perspective, customers and clients to specify the use of the geopolymer because of the history of sort of it's all proprietary technology, and it's dark art and it's smoke and mirrors and this type of sort of observational methodology. The specification is to try and shine a light on that, and to sort of make it easier for people to understand how to procure this type of a solution by laying down the basic rules and information required to get a design done, and it allows the contractor to provide, open information on what their design is based, such that the customers or the clients can analyze that and work out which is the best value solution. So, I mean, we welcome this. Obviously, we're sponsoring this particular event, but it's really about learning. It's about bringing into the engineering environment a new technology and trying to explain more clearly how it works so people can use it in different scenarios. I mean, you can't learn how to design geopolymers on a university course. Let me be honest. That is in the future. I hope that is possible, and so future younger engineers can learn to use this technology, from college and understand the theory behind how it works. And so that's the ultimate aim, I think, is to educate people to use this technology to their advantage.
So maybe having the specification is a step in that direction.
This is the beginning. This is the beginning of a journey. You need to start somewhere. And this is a very good start as far as I can see. But I think, as Peter says, it will be improved on, it will be developed on in the future.
So, Teresa, as our client on the panel, you've talked about how you started to use it more recently. What challenges did you have around it being a proprietary product, and perhaps comparing one solution with another provider? And what does the new framework offer to you, and how does that improve things for you?
So when we were choosing between suppliers, it basically came down to who did we trust more from suppliers that we didn't know, just from talking. And so effectively, to a certain extent, it was how good was a sales pitch, and that's not where you want to be as a client. As a client, we have responsibilities under CVM to make sure that the people that we're using are competent, and we didn't really feel 100% comfortable that we were in that position. And we did do we did due diligence, and we went to quite a few suppliers, but ultimately it came down to a sales pitch. And so having a specification will be a real positive for us, because I was trying to think back to, I couldn't imagine anyone now doing piling without a piling specification. And I'm hopeful that this will go to the same sort of place. So I do now have a supplier that I'll trust to do this work. But what I'm hoping to do is to increase the number of contractors that we can use, because I'm finding more and more areas where we could use this within Anglian Water's work, within our capital works. And now I can be quite sure on the information that I'm providing, and I'll know what and then I'll know what the outputs are going to be. And then I can make a much fairer assessment of what we want to do and who we want to use. So it can only be positive.
So just touching on the point you made there about you finding more and more solutions, what are the real benefits of using expansive geopolymers for those problems for you?
It's a lot of it's about time. So in the past, I'm talking about plugging leaks or stabilizing things, all sorts of things. I've just written down here. Someone said that they've used it for ground slip, and I've got ground slip at the moment that we can't work out how to do with cementation. So I've just made a note during this webinar to look into that. And the reason is because it works in a different way to anything that we've used before. And the tweaking that I've found that you can do between how long it takes to set and the change. So one of the things, and how much force does that create? So if it sets slower, there's a lot less expansive force. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm definitely not the expert in this, but what we're finding is there seems to be quite a big suite of material that can be used in different ways. And lots of our sort of scratching head moments, sort of when we're a little bit stuck, we've now got a new avenue to explore, I guess is what I would say.
So does it offer you better value as well compared to more traditional solutions?
It has done so far. I don't think it always will. but we are trying to use it when it does give better value.
Okay, great, thank you. Jonathan, as our practitioner in the industry, what do you believe the new specification will bring to your work?
I think probably the biggest benefit is going to be a wider acceptance of the technique by particularly our insurance clients. Quite a number of those are still sometimes a bit dubious when we're saying, let's not put nice big concrete piles in the ground here and lots of, reinforced concrete that they understand and can see is going to strengthen something. And we're suggesting a geopolymer solution. And we can't say, they're following a national specification. We've got prices in from a range of contractors, and they're all giving us, a price against a specification. We're turning up saying, we've been to a couple of people, one saying X, one saying Y, and it's very difficult to compare the two exactly like for like, but hopefully with this specification, we'll be getting a standardized set of answers back, which we can compare and quality assure and benchmark against, and then go and look at the cost and say, well, A's got a more competitive price than B. I think for a long time, like people have said before, people have seen it as a bit of a black art and pumping foam in the ground, how can that help? But I think this does give a greater reassurance to people. And then from that come, benefits, particularly in time, as I've mentioned before. So not necessarily the direct cost of, geopolymer is cheaper than piling. But if you do geopolymer in days or weeks as opposed to months, the disruption to clients is far less, and that, particularly in individual homes and things, that goes a long way to keep people more relaxed about it than the disruption of being moved out and living in alternative accommodation for an extended period.
So as well as levelling the playing field around being able to compare one quote with another, do you think it will help raise standards in the industry as well?
Inevitably, I think that will follow, won't it? Because at the moment, you go to different contractors and they come back with always quite detailed specifications and details of what they're planning to do, but it's difficult sometimes to compare exactly what they're offering because you haven't got this national standard to sort of benchmark it against. So hopefully, by having this, everyone's working to the same. And as Peter said, as it's used, if people find there are issues in areas, then the specification can be tweaked and brought in line with what the industry is finding as it actually uses it.
Great, thank you. Andy, I'm just interested in what the key things you learned during the development of the document were. Was there anything that perhaps surprised you?
Well, I think what I would say, I'm not sure about surprised, it's more sort of reassuring in the way you can lay down a methodology. I mean, what I liked about the specification is as with any specification, it's relatively easy to follow and makes it very clear the thought processes from A to B in order to get the finished product, if you know what I'm sort of saying. So, I mean, I think that's what I found more reassuring is being able to write down exactly how things should be done. So everyone's got sort of a roadmap to follow because before there wasn't one and now there is. So I think that's reassuring in itself. And I guess it's always surprising to do something new, and this is new.
Great. Peter, what about you? Same question to you. What did you learn from the process of writing the specification?
I think what I learned is maybe I should go back. I think when we started doing this, I had a conversation with Tim Chapman, and he sort of said, yeah, you should probably aim for a nice snappy 10-page of spec that people can get through pretty easily. And we've been through, over the past few years on developing this with a bit of COVID in between, we've been through sort of various versions, and I think we've been at 160 pages. I think we're down at 50 or 60 pages. for the finished document, including guidance notes. And I think what I really learned is that engineers, when they're sort of interested in things, are really good at writing textbooks and guidance notes and things like that. But writing a spec is a bit trickier. And so people were sent off to sort of throw it away on their own and write subsections for the sort of wider steering group to look at. And we just got lots and lots of guidance notes and not a lot of spec, I think, in the first instance. So we've been very lucky because it's been very easy to write the guidance notes, and we just spent a lot of time on making it a snappy spec. And I think it's interesting when you try and write one of these things, you've got to be very, very clear on who the parties are and who's specifying what and who has a duty to who to produce it. And so we had sort of lots of interesting conversations around that. And very, very similar things happened on the piling spec as well, where you have to remember who the specifier is, because you can't necessarily demand something of the specifier. The spec can tell them what they ought to produce and and offer over. So yeah, I think that's what I learned. We're really good at writing textbooks. So
Teresa and Jonathan, you both specifiers of expansive geopolymers. What did you learn from looking through the specification? Jonathan, we'll come to you first.
As people have said, I think it is more about the fact that it is laying out this route map to follow when you're specifying a geopolymer. There's the general sections at the front which apply to all projects, setting out the basic information, good housekeeping type of things. And then for your particular application, whether it's a floor slab, foundation strengthening, grating voids, there's a specific section, and you can go to that section. You can look at what's required of you as a specifier and make sure you've got that information, because that helps in the end, that you're not relying on contractors interpreting what you've given, then getting to let's start on site and people saying, but we haven't got a site investigation, or we haven't got utility information, whereas it's almost like a tick box that you can go through and make sure you've got the required information, which should mean that as a project starts, everything's there in place and it can progress smoothly through the construction phase on site.
So it's set up better for success. Yeah. What about you, Teresa? What did you learn from looking through the specification?
All the things we should have been doing. So I learned, so I actually learned how much the contractor was doing for us, because we were basically laying a problem at their feet. I need to solve this problem, and I guess what that showed me was actually what I need to find out and what work we need to do in the background in order for it to be successful. So I definitely learned that, and I also learned what should I expect to get from the end. So it was really interesting to see. I like the timescales. So how many days after should I get this bit of information, this bit of information, and that will really help us to, when we have but both in an emergency situation where I guess things can be tightened up, but in our normal projects, actually, how long is the right amount of time so that we can set ourselves up to succeed rather than to fail.
Mm-hmm. So you're not setting unrealistic timescales and demands on the client, on the contractor.
Yeah,
I mean,
on the contractor, and not just expecting to go. I have a problem. Could you solve it? And can you do it really quickly and really cheaply, please?
Brilliant. I can see a couple of questions are coming through on the Q&A box, but please keep adding them. We'll turn to those probably in about 10 minutes time. So now the specification has been published, how should our audience go about using it today? What would your advice be for those looking to apply the specification to their work following this webinar? So Andy, I think you're probably the best place to talk about this. What would you like people to go away and do with the specification?
Well, I think the way the specification is laid out, it sets out to talk to a particular problem that you might have. So whether it is doing ground improvement or whether it is going to fill some voids, if you have a problem on your site and you think that use of expansive geopolymer may be an appropriate solution, then you should look into the specification and see what specific information is required in order for a contractor to do a design to solve that problem, because and the specification lays it out for the different types of problems. We've sort of categorized a number of typical problems where you could use geopolymer, and you can identify which problem you think you have, and it sort of sets out the information that you need to give to the contractor in order for them to give you the design, and at the same time it lays out what information the contractor has to give to you to verify that their design will work, and the associated pricing with that design. So it's a little bit like I'm saying a cookbook, but I mean, you can dip into the different sections and look at the information that you need or need to give for the problem that you have.
So were there any problems that you didn't address in the specification that were just too complicated to put into this point, or did you cover everything you hoped to, Peter? Sorry, landing that question on you.
That's okay. That's okay. I can answer that one. I think we achieved a lot. So I think we achieved picking up all the different methods we could think of. I think we put very clear. We tried to make very clear statements about when and why and how things should happen. I think and we tried to set ranges for inputs and outputs. I think the difficult bit is these are proprietary products, and people have specialist contractors have research and development invested in them, and there's a limit to how far people will necessarily open up. So I think we've squeezed quite hard and got some opening up, but I think there's always space for a little bit more on that. I think we've got to be realistic. So these are different products to steel and concrete and more standard things like that. So it's going to take a bit of time. My sort of hope is that as I've said, I think through use we'll tease a little bit more out of that. I mean, but I would say I've been grateful for the level of openness. I think we've got to we've opened the black box, but I don't think we scratched around at the corners in the bottom of it. But I think we've opened it up. So I hope we have anyway. Time will tell.
Maybe that's for the second version to open up even further. So Teresa and Jonathan, based on your experience of using expansive geopolymers on your projects, how will the specification improve your design and use of the materials? Jonathan, can we come to you first?
I think it would just level the playing field between the different contractors as well, rather than perhaps having a preferred supplier who you're comfortable with working with, what they're giving you. You can now go to the specification, as Andy said, pick the appropriate sections, provide the information and send it to a range of contractors in the knowledge that you're going to get back like for like tenders, and hopefully that will get the best value ultimately for your client.
Great, thank you. Teresa, what about you? What would you do differently? How will it improve what you do?
I just really to reiterate that I think it is that expansion of the supply chain will be really good, and I think what else it might show is that some supply chain aren't ready, but it will help them to become to get better and to maybe professionalize to a certain extent so that they can deliver against that specification. And what it will change for us is that I now know what would be expected from sort of both me as if I'm there with my client hat on, or me if I'm there with my sort of design and build hat on. I now know what I need to input, what is expected of us, and so we can go ahead and do that now, rather than sort of providing partial information or incomplete. Yeah, so we can just do the package now, which will be really helpful.
Brilliant. So we've talked so far about the specification being a starting point, so I'd like to explore what the next steps are. How do we as an industry make the specification as accepted as the piling specification, which we've already mentioned, that was pioneered by the Federation of Piling Specialists? I mean, like you're saying, it's hard to imagine not using that today. How do we get there with this specification? And where do you hope the sector will be, say, in 5 years' time, if the specification has the same impact? Peter?
Great. I mean, I think how we get there, and I can't emphasize this enough, so it's good. I could say it again. I think it is, let's use it, and see what works and what doesn't, and and that's been the piling spec has been through 2 iterations that I've been involved with, and several more before that, and really that's developed through people using it. People finding new ways to do certain things, or slightly new products, or slightly new things turning up, and that needing to be included. And I think we're still arguing about the piling spec, every time. So there are still things we can look at. There are still things as an industry we don't quite agree with in that. And I see this as being the same thing. So it is a starting point. We'll use it. I hope what Teresa and Jonathan are saying are things I would hope they would say. That we are trying to make this a more repeatable and expected sort of process. So I hope in 5 years' time we're only 2 more revisions down would be nice, and and not too arduous. That would be nice. And I hope the effect of that is to let clients or designers have sort of more open conversations on their projects about using this, and not just say, we know of this stuff and it could solve our problem if we just tell some specialist contractors what our problem is. We can be more open about how we explain that, and hopefully that openness and repeatability will help. I think Jonathan said earlier, sort of leveling up, and I think that's certainly what happened in the piling industry to react to having an overarching spec was, things were more repeatable between different contractors as well, and that helps everyone.
Brilliant, thank you. Andy, where do you hope the industry will be in 5 years' time with use of the specification?
Well, I mean, I hope the use is more ubiquitous. We've not touched on some of the other benefits of geopolymer. I mean, Jonathan has mentioned how it is a non-disruptive solution, which is always something of interest to customers, and also lower in CO2 emissions compared to traditional techniques. And as we move forward, where there's more demand for more environmentally friendly design solutions, I think geopolymer is an area that we can look at to the future. What I think needs potential improvement in later versions is some more clearer explanation of the theoretical design principles, which will sort of level the playing field so everyone is clear how these things work, and so people can effectively challenge designs with knowledge to make sure they're getting the best solution for their site. But for me, I would like to see far more use in lots of different applications. But in order to do that, you need to be able to explain to people how these things work, and the specification is the means that we've started to do that.
So it definitely would help remove that term dark art being linked with expansive geopolymers.
That's the way forward to become a more universally accepted technology. That's not where we want to be. We need to be more open and it being very clear at the technical level how these things work, and that's really goes all the way down to student engineers to the very beginning of their careers, understanding how this works compared to, say, compaction grouting using cement, or or piling, or any other geotechnical process that we use to improve the ground, because there's many different options out there, and the designer needs to select the best option for their particular project. This is one thing in the toolbox. and I think that's the key thing that all geotechnical designers need to take away.
Definitely. Thank you. Jonathan, where do you hope the industry will be in 5 years' time with use of the specification, and what will that bring for what you do as in your day-to-day job?
Yeah, I think very much following on from what Andy has just said, that by having a specification that is widely accepted across the industry, clients, we work mainly in the insurance industry, so it'll be our insurance clients, accepting it as a recognized technique that whether it's underpinning, piling, or a geopolymer solution, they're not coming back querying it if that's the suggested way forward. It's just that is an accepted route to go, and you're looking for the best value, minimum disruption solution, whichever that may be for the particular problem that you're dealing with.
Great, thank you. And Teresa, where do you hope the industry will be in 5 years' time with use of specification? Perhaps how will that change what you do?
Yeah, so consistency, I think is how I'd sum that up. That I hope that we're consistently doing the same thing everywhere, so that so that no matter where in the country or whoever's doing it, we're getting the same thing. And I hope that that leads us into considering. At the moment, we've been considering the use of geopolymers really in emergency works or when our normal solutions don't work, and we need to do things differently. And we're trying to do that at the moment. Anglian Water, we're trying to think always, is there a better way, especially around sustainability? And obviously this is it has lower CO2, it isn't a toxic material. So I'd like it to get to the point where it's understood enough that it's accepted in our normal engineering processes and solutions, rather than it sort of sitting out on the side, which is where it is at the moment.
Which I think goes back to what Andy said about it becoming a go-to solution. It's not a case of it being something different. It's part of the toolbox.
Yeah.
So let's turn to some questions now from our audience. We've got a couple coming already. Do please add some more as we're answering these. So the first one comes from D. Anson. He says he's used I'm assuming it's a he, sorry, shouldn't say that, should I? Used the system successfully on a recent project, and imagine it's not alone in their reservations, particularly concerning the control of expansive forces. Perhaps that's a question put to you, Andy. What advice can you give around the control of the expansive forces, and what controls are there, and how does the specification help with understanding on that?
Yeah, I mean, that comes down to the design solution that the specialist contractor adopts. But I mean, you can calculate quite clearly what the expansive force is going to be if you inject a certain amount of geopolymer, a certain type at a certain depth, and you can calculate what the expansive force is going to be. And you can calculate the radius of influence as well of that expansive force. So, I mean, that comes down to good design, really. And so if a customer has an issue and is concerned about will the expansion of the geopolymer cause stress on an adjacent structure, as that might be a question that's raised, well, you can actually calculate whether that is going to happen or not, and then adjust the design accordingly. These things are predictable. It's not sort of happenstance, if you like. You know, we can calculate what the impact is going to be and then modify the design accordingly.
So Peter, does the specification help with that, help convey that knowledge, understanding?
I hope so. I mean, actually, this is a thing I've been burned with previously with more traditional grouting, in terms of sort of unexpected pressures on other things, or unexpected impacts on other things. So, yeah, I mean, the spec has prompts, if you like, for the specifier to try and make sure they're sort of understanding what's critical for their own project. So, you know, for example, if you've got an adjacent structure that you need to control pressures on, I think the spec would prompt you to provide details of that. It certainly asks the designer to provide details of sensitive adjacent structures and things like that. So it's the idea is, as Teresa said, it's sort of to start the designer in that mode, thinking about what's critical and what might be important. And clearly with something that's expansive, you get some pressures, so you need to be able to communicate to the specialist contractor what might be damaged by that. You know, if you're in a field in the middle of nowhere, clearly it doesn't matter. But if you're in a, you know, sort of built up city environment, there quite likely might be things that you don't want to put forces into that you don't understand.
Teresa, just coming to you, did you feel that you had that kind of knowledge when you were doing that first project with geopolymers, expanded geopolymers on that burst pipe? Did you feel you had that knowledge, or do you think that the specification will help ensure that you do understand the expansive forces better?
So you know, within our teams, we had a geotechnical engineer that we were using, and we had some, you know, some really good technical engineers. So we knew that expansive forces could be a problem. What we did is we relied on our specialists to make sure that they would be okay. So I know that in the background there was a conversation around that, but that very much relied on the fact that, sort of, I guess, as a client team, we are very engineering aware. Whereas a slightly more removed client team from that doesn't involve engineers within the team, that would be a problem, and it would be something that, you know, to specify that the fact that needs to be considered would be really helpful.
So the specification is really good in that way for other clients.
Yeah.
So got another questions come in again on expansive forces, saying, is the accuracy of the calculations of expansive forces dependent on the accuracy of the knowledge of the ground conditions? Oh, sorry, the question jumping around, being pumped, the ground conditions that the polymers being pumped into. Can this knowledge be obtained without too much disruption? Andy, could you answer that one, please?
Yeah, I mean, the amount of expansive force, I mean, a good quality site investigation is always critical in any sort of geotechnical design, you know. I think we all know this. So we do need information on the soil strength and the stiffness of the soil, which you can get from a site investigation. And based on an understanding of the soil stiffness, you can calculate what the expansive forces are going to be. So, you know, but if you have no information at all, then obviously you need to take a very conservative view in your design as to what is going to happen. So, I mean, that would be my answer. You know, better quality, and the specification asks for that. It's very good in highlighting the information that's required by the designer or the specialist contractor. It sets out what sort of level of site investigation information is needed in order to get a realistic and cost-effective design.
I think there's never going to be a shortcut on how to get information on the ground conditions. I think as geotechnical engineers are always saying that, and that's never going to change. So we've got another question here. It's an anonymous question. So my interest is in geopolymer use for piling and hole stabilization against collapse and water flow. This would allow the use of more environmentally accepted inert material than bentonite. What are the different types of geopolymer and their properties? So I think, Andy, this is another question for you. So it's slightly different from expansive geopolymers, but
yes. So I mean, I think it was mentioned before. I mean, all specialist contractors have a range of different polymers available, and some of them are fast-acting, high-lift polymers for lifting slabs, and other ones are lower expansive, but more likely to flow in the subsurface, and they're often much stronger. So all geopolymers, there's a wide range available, and they do have different properties. And you need to select the geopolymer for the right problem you're trying to fix. So it depends. This question is relating to water flow. So it depends on the scenario you're in. But I mean, I know we use a certain type of polymer to seal behind sheet pilings that are leaking water. You use a fast-acting polymer to fill a hole very quickly. But if you're trying to permeate sand and gravel, you may use a different type of polymer in order to reduce the permeability of a larger area of ground. So it's a little bit like horses for courses. But again, the specification is very useful in laying out what the requirements are in order for a design to be done. And that does require the client to specify what they want. And then the contractor can provide a design to meet that requirement.
So Peter, does the specification set out information about the different types of geopolymers that are available, just so people understand perhaps what their contractor might be talking about?
I do, where it does set out, so and this is going back a little bit to the previous question on ground investigation as well. I mean, I think it sets out what sort of what sort of things are appropriate to what sort of problems or what sort of ground conditions. And again, the sort of ranges of behavior of polymers that you're using that one might expect someone to come back with. I don't think we get as far as naming names and and getting into type. So it's really about thinking about ranges of behavior for particular applications. Again, this is black box stuff. So I think if we can get further on that in future iterations, because it turns out everyone uses the same sort of thing, or there are particular advantages to certain sorts of chemicals, if you like, within these things, then I'd be very keen to try and tighten that up.
But perhaps
I can add a point on that, Claire, just to support it. The specification does actually state that certain properties of the geopolymer should be stated by the contractor. And certain properties of the geopolymer may be something that I would call cream time. That is the time between injection and the reaction starting of the geopolymer. Now, all specialist contractors know these times for the different polymers available, and they can be specified at the time of tender, so you know what type of reaction you're going to get. And the polymer, the specification, it does allow the right questions to be asked of the contractor, and the contractor can then answer those questions so that you can see what you're going to get. So that the polymer will be either a fast reacting polymer or a slow reacting polymer. I think it does enable that information to be handed over. And I think that is a real big step forward, because before you wouldn't really know. If you don't ask the question, you don't get the answer. And the specification requires these questions to be asked.
And looking at how the polymer reacts removes the need to actually perhaps have a chemistry degree to actually understand what you're looking at.
Yeah, you don't need a PhD in chemistry to understand geopolymer design, fortunately for me. But as you can get general information which is of the right level for a competent engineer to do a design. And
Teresa, does that really help you when you're choosing a geopolymer to actually understand that information?
Yeah, massively. So we did specify, well, it wasn't a specification, but so we had some examples where something needed to be done quickly because it needed to set before, and further downstream there's a pump station that we can't isolate. So we knew that it needed to go quickly. And then we've had situations where we've known it needs to go slowly because it needed to infiltrate further. But we didn't so much specify that as talking, as I said, talk about the problem. And so our specialists then started, okay, what you need is, but it would be good to be in control of that. That would help a lot.
Jonathan, would that also help you when you're specifying it for insurance projects and things like that?
Yes, I think so, because now you're asking the question up front. Often these things have come out in discussions with a specialist contractor, a bit further down the line. Often you've just gone to a contractor in the past and said, here's the problem, and hopefully give them a site investigation and an explanation of the issue, and ask for a price. Then you get a price, and then you start talking maybe the detail and understanding it in more detail. Whereas now, as Andy said, if you get the specification right, you fill in all the right sections, you should be getting back from the tendering contractors a detailed package of information that gives you information, and then you can compare what you're being told, and if there are issues, one saying fast, one saying slow, you can investigate that at that initial stage of tender consideration, rather than along the line when you're perhaps committed to one particular solution.
Great, thank you. So we've got another question come in saying, with this being a relatively new technology, I think compared to other geotechnical solutions, and you are trying to increase confidence in the market, around the client and insurance, is there a database of its use, i.e. the specification, to create a body of evidence that people can actually reflect on? So Peter, are you actually gathering sort of examples of the use of the specification that perhaps you could add as a annex or something to the specification?
Yeah, so I quite like this question because it's something that sort of hadn't come to me, which and so this has been quite useful. I've been sat reflecting on the question for the last.
You've got some homework to take away.
I think I fully expect, as we put this out there, that, you know, interested parties, or, you know, or even people that like picking up typos will no doubt contact us over the next while, and, you know, and make it clear where, you know, where there are any perceived deficiencies or anything like that. So I sort of, you know, and that's true of other specs and documents that are put out there, because we're quite good as an industry at doing that sort of thing. We're interested in the details. But what I hadn't really thought of is a good mechanism for doing that. And I think, I mean, I think that's quite a neat idea. I think, you know, I think in this age of managing data better than we ever have done, I think, you know, having somewhere to put the data on this is quite nice. So I think I'd like to try and think of some way to do that. I mean, I think that might be a chat we want to have, Claire, about you know, about how we could possibly do that. But yeah, I think it'll be neat. We're not, but I think, you know, apart from within individual, you know, I'll be tracking it within our, I'm sure the other attendees will be tracking its use within their companies. But I hadn't really thought to do a general one, so so it's a neat question. So thank you, and we'll try and think of something on that. I'd like to.
Something also to consider is, I know we've talked about the very positive side of use of expansive geopolymers, is perhaps maybe if it's possible to use anonymized examples of where it's perhaps not worked so well, so people can also learn from that. Do you think that's something that the industry would be open to doing, if you could anonymize it without it linking particular clients or particular products? Peter?
I'd be interested. I'd be interested. I think anonymizing is probably key, but I think we can all find examples of where we've done things that we thought were a perfectly good idea that have turned out to be not a good idea. So, you know, help around that is always useful for the industry. You know, and we shouldn't be shy on doing that.
Andy, I'm certainly not saying that any of Geobear's projects have ever gone wrong, but is it something you would welcome as an industry, is sharing that knowledge and being honest with each other about where it works and where it doesn't work?
Yeah, I mean, the specification, it does give some boundaries to certain types of soil that you need to be very careful in designing with geopolymers, and they're listed in the document. So it's already recognised that some soils are more of a challenge than others. And they're listed actually in the actual specification. It says which ones need special attention, okay. Which is it is a sort of it's a note of caution that, you know, we're not trying to say that geopolymers can be used in every single scenario imaginable. I mean, that would be ridiculous to say that. But I mean, all design solutions have limitations.
So the specification certainly sets out those limitations.
It does set out some boundaries that need special attention. So I think that's what I would say. But you could have a perfectly good solution, but do the design incorrectly, and it doesn't work. It's like, you know, so, you know, you can build a steel suspension bridge and you design it wrong and it falls down. That doesn't mean that steel isn't any good as a material.
It just comes back to the design.
The design and how you apply the actual polymer in the right scenario. And so it's more important to understand the ground conditions, because that's the thing that's probably going to catch you out more than the actual polymer.
Great. So I think the advice today is to go out and read the specification, use it, learn from it. And I think that's just about all we've got time for today, though. So thank you all for joining us, especially to our panelists for sharing their insight about the use of expansive geopolymers and how the new specification adds a new level of technical rigor to their use. If you have colleagues who have missed the webinar, they will be able to register to watch it on demand very soon. And if you want to listen back to the discussion, it will also be available to anyone who watched it live today. I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us.